Thank you so much. And thanks for everybody for battling the rain. It is also pretty awful weather here from Berlin, Germany, is where I'm phoning in. And I'm unfortunately still recovering from COVID. So I apologize that my voice is not 100% back. That said, I'm really happy to be here. I want to give a small disclaimer. So I work in the field of machine learning. I've been in the field of machine learning for more than 10 years. I guess now we call it AI, but I still call it machine learning. And I think I often bring a quite applied technology perspective as, although I studied statistics and math in school, I mainly studied during a time where we didn't believe machine learning was going to be useful. Because we were in quote unquote AI winter, machine learning winter, whatever we want to say. That said, I've worked in the field for a long time. I bring very practitioner point of view. I, of course, know about a lot of the theoretical perspectives over time as well. But a lot of the audiences I speak to are often technologists like me, so people working in the field. So some of my opinions may be preaching to the choir today, maybe things that you've already been thinking about for a long time and work that maybe even your research has focused on. I'm very excited to be here because I'm hoping to meet folks like that. So please make sure you reach out. And then also I'm hoping that maybe some of the ideas that I share with you today inspire ways to kind of bridge the gap between theoretical and research-based studies of ethical impacts and privacy impacts of technology to what we can actually apply when we're building these models or when we're training or when we're using machine learning systems in production systems today. Okay, disclaimer over. This is me. This is me about nearly 7 years ago. I was giving my first ever keynote at a technical conference. This was at PyData Amsterdam. PyData is a large conference for technologists who work in the data space, often data science or machine learning. And I gave a keynote on ethical machine learning. And at the time, you can see my fresh young face, I was very excited about the idea that if we just knew that there was biases, human biases in machine learning systems, if we understood that the ways that we labeled data, the ways that we trained these models could bring harm to people, that if that was just well known and well understood, that we would not only find a way to counteract this, but we would also find a way to build safer models, to build more responsible models, and to kind of, with technology, let's just say, that was very much my idea at the time, with technology, we could solve a problem caused by technology. Well, like one could argue caused by technology, societal injustices, so on and so forth. And so that was me at that point in time. I was fairly active in the field of natural language processing, or NLP, or down the basis for large language models and so forth. And I was pretty convinced that there was going to be a way for us to figure out how to build fairer models by figuring out how to better understand our training data, better understand algorithmic ways to counteract those, better build specialized models and so forth that could address the concerns that were being raised at that point in time, and unfortunately have not been fixed to this point in time. And at the time, I was also fairly active in data for good, AI for good types of organizations, some here in Berlin, some kind of helping on a more global scale. And as I continued to work in those areas, it started to feel maybe like maybe it wasn't working out the way that I had hoped, and I'm sure many of my peers had hoped and colleagues. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, the comedy sketch. I believe it's from a British comedy group of Are We the Baddies, but you can look it up. But it started to feel like maybe I was having an Are We the Baddies moment, where things kept coming out, predictive pred polls, and also any types of predictive policing systems that came out also in the UK with CCTV. A lot of these were deployed and trained on data sets without informing people. Cambridge Analytica, obviously the idea of targeted advertisements towards people, potentially using personalization and so forth, algorithms to actively initiate people into voting or to move people out of voting, so to incentivize or disincentivize people to vote based on potential misinformation or disinformation campaigns targeted via personalization. Obviously, there was also things like Taybot happening, so ways that active learning environments were being actively poisoned with malicious content, and military drones built by Google, and so on and so forth. So as you know, a bunch of folks that I care about, that I know, and also many people who I don't know, whose work I admire in this space, I continue to support it, but I started to wonder, is this really the way that we're going to influence and change the things that are happening in machine learning and AI that I feel concerned about, and that many people I know feel concerned about? And as things continue to develop, as the field got some more steam, right? So we reached some new milestones in terms of natural language processing. Obviously, then the beginnings of attention-based networks. For any of you who have studied machine learning, this was kind of the breakthrough around that same time that allowed for the transformer models, which is the base of a lot of what some people call foundation models, but what a lot of us in the field called large language models, or now multimodal models. Multimodal just means that they can interpret video, image, audio, and text, and also output any of these. So all of these, you know, the OpenAI work is based off of some research that focuses on attention, and then it moved beyond that. But as those things started to happen, and as we started to see new breakthroughs in the field, it also started to point out to me even more that the idea of forming ethical machine learning, and what we were working on from even the research I followed from a theoretical point of view, that was not actually addressing the challenges that we were seeing in the real world and the impact that we were seeing in the real world. So I hope that it's very well known to this group that OpenAI underpaid workers, and that Facebook does the same with their content moderation systems. Those workers recently unionized to try to fight and also get some mental health counseling for the amount of extremely toxic and damaging content that they need to look at and label every day. And here on the left is a small screenshot of Kate Crawford's work with an artist based here in Berlin, called the Atlas of AI. I highly encourage you to look at it, because it's a complete map of the AI ecosystem, from looking at how we mine the minerals that run the chips in the GPUs and so forth, but also to here, which is a view of the labor hierarchy that we have within machine learning systems today, of the labor, of, you know, the quote unquote bottom group of laborers being those that label or collect data. That's often now outsourced to third-party companies or fourth-party companies in a lot of ways, and spread mainly across the global south. Then we can see kind of the intermediary, maybe the data cleaners, the data engineers, and so forth, collecting and merging that data. And then people like me that are still, by the way, laborers, but are just paid better for it and seen as knowledge workers, whatever that means. And those people are then doing the machine learning and so forth. And we have created, you know, these hierarchies in a lot of ways in the work that we do, and in the way that we split the work that we do around machine learning. And I thought maybe this is maybe the issue that we should talk about. In addition, we have, you know, I'm asking myself, is the issue really that we don't, you know, that we need to study ethical machine learning, or is the issue that people's work is being used to make money and work that is not attributed to them? So this person probably exists is a great piece of research to look at, where they studied that GAN-generated or generative adversarial networks that generate, you know, new faces, that one can track them down to features of faces that they've seen in the training data. We obviously have seen also with the Writers Guild strike, the movement for people whose work is based off of things like writing, creative output, creative videos, creative text, that they are directly impacted, and that a lot of these systems are also trained on their data without giving them any type of remuneration or credit for their work. So this maybe the issue is, intellectual property rights. Maybe part of the issue is the ability for people to opt in or out of training, maybe the issue. So these are thoughts that I was having. And then finally, I got inspired. I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I got inspired by some of the work of Stop LAPD Spying, as well as some of the research that they have put out of the history of data being used against communities. So here I come from Los Angeles, California. That's where I'm originally from. I have a strong also bond with the city. I grew up in the 90s during the Rodney King riots, and there is a lot of conversation in LA from that time and continuing around policing, around anti-racism, around surveillance, and so on and so forth. And some of the work around that time and some of the history of Los Angeles as a city is based around concepts like redlining. So pushing people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color out of certain neighborhoods to gentrify them, running censuses and surveys, deploying policing in very particular ways based on data of who is there, creating laws to essentially make it illegal to be poor, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, this is the history in a lot of places in the United States. I just know very particularly my experience in LA. But what I started to also question is, what data do we actually want digitized? And is there certain data that by its very collection can and will harm people? And I think that, my time in Germany has also made me think about that, obviously, the history of Germany and data as a use of genocide and violence. And so what I started to wonder is there not like more bigger problems that maybe we should be putting as part of the conversation of ethical machine learning, but maybe it's a bigger scope. Maybe it's stepping back beyond, and maybe it's thinking about, what does data mean for the world? What does a human choice mean for the world? What does human rights mean in a field of automated decisions or in a field of automated content? And this is some of what has led me down my path. Luckily, I had reached, as might be apparent, I had reached a bit of a crisis at this point in time of thinking about these things and wondering, is machine learning really what I want to do with my life and my career? Obviously, I love math. I love the work. It's pretty interesting to me, but I don't want to create and perpetuate harm based off of my daily work. Luckily, when I was in university, I had the great honor of studying under Cedric Robinson. He was one of my thesis advisors when I was an undergraduate at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And he's also the creator of the theory and perhaps maybe one day the practice of Black Marxism. In case you're not familiar, obviously Black Marxism is a kind of ideology of Marxism based in Black radical theory and Black radical experience. And he was one of the thought leaders in the formation of one of the first Black studies departments in the United States. And my work with Cedric taught me a lot of things. One of the things that it taught me is to recognize and to use my power and privilege, not to be mired in dystopian thinking, not to be mired and left inept or unable to move and take action based off of my own guilt, based off my own inaction in the world of addressing kind of maybe the forms of oppression that work in our world. And what Cedric has always inspired me to do, and unfortunately he passed away a few years ago, but has always inspired myself and many, many other people to do, is to figure out how to build a utopia, how to think through, if the world was different, what would we want to see? how could we move, instead of reforming today, how could we move towards building something that we could be proud to partake in, something that is radically different than what we see today. And so Cedric's work has deeply inspired me to take moments of despair, like the one that I reached in ethical machine learning, and to try to formulate it into something that I could use my power and privilege and my knowledge to do something better with, to actually have an impact. And beyond that, I also started to learn about other folks who had been critical of automated decision-making systems for a long time. And I'm not sure how many of you know of the work of Joseph Weizenbaum, but here he is. He is actually potentially the first person to ever build a natural language processing system. Here he's logging in via terminal. He also did the first system to read checks with computer vision. This is very, very, very basic stuff, much better since his time. But he also came out in the later years of his career as quite a large critic of the automation of these systems and the digitalization of these systems. His belief is that if he hadn't created the automated check reading system for the Bank of America, they wouldn't have been able to expand to such growth and have so much impact on the banking systems for a long time. And what he believed was that the computer has been a fundamentally conservative force, that it allows for power to be essentially saved and concentrated in certain parts, in institutions and organizations, and often with those that might already have power. And so his work has also inspired my thinking, and reading through a lot of his later pieces of work inspired me to where I am today. One of the things, so now I'm moving into kind of where I started to turn. So I think one of the things that I hope maybe that you all are working on, and one thing that I encourage us to work on as a field, is maybe to think through the impact, and to spend a lot more time researching the impact than the technology itself or the theory itself. And this will involve lots of potential social science research that should be multidisciplinary in focus, but should definitely also do long-term studies, which means I'm hoping that the long-term studies are starting now, with the hope that 5 to 10 years from now, we can talk about the impact of outsourcing labor to the global south to label content that we see online, what the impact this has had on economies there. My guess is not creating a lot of sustainable knowledge work. And another piece of advice that I might have, and this goes along with my work from Stop LAPD Spying. They're an organization that works against surveillance systems in LA, particularly against the LAPD, who, by the way, use a lot of predictive policing, and recently got, I think, $1 billion worth of funding to buy robot dogs that can use computer vision and go around and also can shoot people. So obviously the situation is quite dire there in terms of the actual impact of machine learning. It could lead to arrest, death, so on and so forth. And what I would encourage us to do as researchers, for those of you that are researchers and also as practitioners, is to make space for voices of people and communities that are directly impacted by these technologies, to try to make as much space at the table for these voices, that they are potentially more important than any research voice or any practitioner voice that should be there, and that they also have a front seat view of the impact of these technologies on humans. And that I know here within Europe, we have a lot better regulatory controls, but there are people around the world that are actively impacted by these technologies already today. And maybe it would be worthwhile inviting them to also participate in events either like this one or other ones like this, where we can learn from mistakes made by governments who have zero to basically negative impact on the deployment of these systems and their impact on communities that they touch. And a little bit on my thing, I mean, maybe I hope that you heard a little bit of what started to become clear to me in my work on ethical machine learning was that human choice of data use and active consent is perhaps one way to solve some of these problems. And perhaps even essentially the ban of use of personal data for training without explicit consent, that perhaps this can create a fairer systems and over time. There's several links that we can debate around fairness and privacy. I'm happy to talk about them. But I think from what I've seen is giving people the ability to say, actually, I'd rather not participate in that, could have a fundamental shift also in who is allowed to build models, who has the data for building these models, and how might we put the data more in hands of communal organizations who we don't have to worry about how they might use the data against us or against people like us or against people not like us. And I guess that was a lot of my shift into privacy, because I see privacy as being something that we can actively use today to try to influence how we build products, how we build technology, and to make user consent the focus, to make human, benefit and worth the focus, and to make transparency also of how data is being used, what data is being used, for what purposes, for what secondary or tertiary purposes. And I strongly believe that this is a way. I've now focused my career on it. Here's a great colleague and friend, Dr. Nikima Steffenbauer, and she is the forward author of my book that I wrote called Practical Data Privacy. It's mainly for technologists, talking about how do we actually use privacy technologies in machine learning to give better protection for people, to allow different types of machine learning, such as distributed machine learning, where people can essentially have better control over how their data is being used and more transparency of how it's being contributed. So that's a bit. I'll leave finally, sorry, it might be 1 minute over time. I leave us with some questions that maybe we can debate during the discussion. What could you be doing if you weren't building or researching what you are now? So I want you to kind of think, if you, like me, are questioning what is the impact of my work, perhaps thinking of what if not my work, then what then? And maybe also, like me, you're inspired to potentially leave a positive impact on this world with your life and your work. So instead of maybe focusing on the technology or theory, I ask you, what could you change if you focused on the change and not that? So if you actually focused on whatever system change you'd like to see, whatever societal change you'd like to see. And what if we collectively took responsibility for the future of the world instead of the future of particular technologies? And that's what I'll leave you with today. I'm very open to your ideas, questions, challenges. I also run a small newsletter and some video content on Probably Private, and I'm excited to continue the conversation today.
Thank you very much, Katharine.